Welcome to C2GTalk, a series of one-on-one interviews with influential practitioners and thought leaders to explore the governance challenges raised by emerging approaches to alter the climate. I'm Mark Turner, Senior Communications Consultant with C2G, and I'm with the pleasure to speak today with Gabriela Ramos, who's UNESCO's Assistant Director General for Social and Human Sciences. Amongst many other achievements, Ms. Ramos oversaw the development and adoption of the first global instrument to promote the ethics of artificial intelligence, adopted in 2021 by UNESCO's General Conference. She also launched the Global Forum Against Racism and several initiatives to combat gender stereotypes and biases, including in new technologies. Previously, Gabriela Ramos worked as Cabinet Director at the OECD, as Director of the OECD Office in Mexico and Latin America, and as a member of the Mexican Foreign Service. Gabriela Ramos, welcome to C2G Talk. Well, let's start with your work at UNESCO as Assistant Director General for Social and Human Sciences, where I understand you oversee efforts to build inclusive societies. What does that work look like in practice?
Well, it's pretty straightforward, Mark. The mandate of UNESCO is to promote education, is to promote culture, and is to promote science. And in my case, the social and human sciences are those that enable us to take better decisions when they are based on evidence. So we promote research, we push governments to invest more in science, but also to use science for decision making. The context we are now living with so many crises and conflict and major trends that are putting a lot of pressure in our societies, inequalities, climate, digital, requires us to have a very out-of-the-box thinking based on science, on multidisciplinary endeavors, to ensure that the world becomes much more inclusive, and this is what we're doing through research. But we also have a very nice mandate that is unique in the whole UN system and in the whole multilateral system, which is to promote the ethics of science and technology, so that all these developments are not only useful or good, but that they are bring us to where we want to go as humanity.
And what specific challenges does climate change and the work around climate science bring to this goal?
Well, first, I would say that with the IPCC reports that are telling us that we are completely lagging behind in terms of our objectives for the transition to carbon neutral economies, we have enough science, but we still have climate deniers, and that's something that is quite telling, in terms of the fact that the efforts that we need to do to dewire ourselves from fossil fuels are so huge that it's really impossible to do it if you don't bring more understanding of what does it take. Because it seems that we have not been good enough to look at the behavioral changes that we need to impinge in our societies and our economies to have a more sustainable path. The way the economy works, in terms of being measured by GDP, for example, only, and growth in GDP, ignores completely the impact on natural depletion in terms of our natural resources. And this is something that needs to change. And this is not a great scientific endeavor, it's just to replace or to go beyond GDP right, to include these elements.
Well, as you know, our work at C2G is focused on the governance of climate-altering technologies. Recently, the World Commission on the Ethics of Scientific Knowledge and Technology, COMEST, which is an advisory body to UNESCO, pre-launched a report on the ethics of climate engineering. So before we talk about its findings, can you say a little bit about COMEST and its work, what it does?
Well, yes, it's a body that was established 30 years ago at UNESCO to exactly do what I was referring in the first part of our conversation, to apply this ethical framework to the development of the technologies. And I think in this very fast pace of the technological development in which we are confronting in so many fields, in neurotechnology, artificial intelligence, and all of them converging in some way, it's very important that we take pause and that we use the ethical framework to put the right questions. First, in terms of do we need these technologies? Second, what do they bring to our objectives as human beings in building inclusive and fair societies? And third, are these developments being carried forward in a responsible way? So the comments have been really producing amazing insights on, as I said, on the question of artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, the COVID vaccines, and they took it over to look at the climate engineering technologies. So it's part of their duties, but it's very interesting that we with C2G and also with the Climate Overshoot Committee, we all consider that this is something that we need to look closely.
Right. Well, to delve a bit deeper on that, why is it, do you think, that Commerce decided to take on this issue of climate engineering? What made it a topic worth looking at now?
First, because it's imminent. Technologies are there and can be used to modify the atmospheric conditions or the emission of carbon, or and therefore it's important that we are aware, and this is one of the roles that UNESCO plays to raise awareness of these issues. But second, because climate is such an unsurmountable task that we need all hands on deck. And therefore, they also wanted to see how much there is a possibility to rely on these technologies to achieve our climate goals. So I feel that there were these two sides: to understand better the technologies, to see if they really deliver on what they are promising to do, and to see if they can also be reliable for the task that we have in front of us in reducing climate emergencies.
Right. Well, let's have a little talk about the findings of the report, if that's okay. I understand, so as you alluded to, it looked at two broad approaches: carbon dioxide removal, which seeks to draw down CO2 already emitted into the atmosphere, and solar radiation modification, which would seek a set of approaches that would seek to reflect a small portion of incoming sunlight back into space to lower the temperature. What do you see as the major takeaways from this report on both of those issues?
First, as I said, Mark, what is very interesting is that the experts that conform the committee explain what it means to have these technologies, no? The fact that you can, with these very sophisticated planes and the kind of atmospheric explosions that you can do based on volcano experiences before, and then it seems that there is this effect where you can create a protection for the most dangerous solar rays. It needs to be explained. It needs to be explained also that we have now advanced a lot in terms of carbon capture. Carbon capture is more complex because it's very expensive, and it's also we still have not decided what you do once you capture the carbon. You need to storage it. Where do you store it is very complex. On the other hand, the solar radiation technologies or reduction technologies seems to be not very expensive. I think that there were some numbers in the report that you will need 18 billion investments for each centigrade reduction by these technologies. And as I said, it seems that they are at hand now. And therefore, it's important to distinguish these two, and that's why the committee focused mostly on the solar radiation. But then, even if it was possible, no, even if you and I and your work also confirm that they are handy, the question is first the precautionary principle, that is an ethical element. Have we considered all the unintended consequences? Are we sure that we can modulate these interventions so that we achieve the outcome that we want in terms of reducing the impact of the solar radiation in the atmosphere? Or are we going to overshoot and then produce a freezing or long-term freezing period? I mean, these are questions from the technological point of view that need to be taken. But then there are some societal questions that are very important, which is who is to take the decision? And as you have done with the C2G project too, who is in charge? If we take the decisions, who is in charge? Who is going to be impacted? Are all those that are going to be impacted part of these conversations? Who is going to develop the governance of these technologies to make sure that this is not only in the hands of those that can make it, but also in the hands of everybody? What are the distributive impacts? Do we have all the voices at the table? Do we think about intergenerational justice? There are these questions that the committee is asking for. Is the knowledge of these technologies enough to do it? And then there are also political questions, because we are now under this very important pressure to deliver on the national determined contributions that are nowhere to be seen, Mark. You know it. In the international negotiations, we now cannot even talk about fossil fuels. And so we are just backtracking from the Paris Agreement. And therefore, it's important also not to see the technologies as a fantastic solution, but also to see them in the context of all the other efforts, and whether these technologies and using these technologies will add up to our efforts, or are just going to make us relax and think that, okay, the technologies are going to save us, so why should we care about going to the mitigation efforts that we need? So all these questions are put there, but the most important one is that we need to have inclusive debates. We need to include, because as usual, these technologies are being patented by few countries in the north, as artificial intelligence, as many other technologies. And this is a global issue that needs to include the global south. It needs to include the civil society, and it needs to really, really be an inclusive conversation.
Well, that was a great summary of some of these crucial questions. And I'd love to just pick through a couple of them in a little more detail. Maybe we'll start on the broad question that you alluded to, which is often known as the moral hazard argument, the idea that pursuing some of these approaches could reduce pressure on society to cut CO2 emissions in the first place. Do you see that as a genuine risk? And I wonder also, could we almost see it working the other way around, whereby focusing solely on emissions cuts could undermine other potential avenues to reduce risk? How do you see this moral hazard argument, given the reality of likely overshoot that we're in?
Well, I would just reframe a little bit the question, because I don't think that we need to convince the civil society. Actually, you have seen it. The civil society-led actions by young people are upfront. And we are now in the week that where Greta Thunberg was put into a legal case because of disturbing and using means that were not appropriate. But at the end, what she has done and all the other young people is to tell us that we are not doing enough. So the civil society is conscious. The only point is that we have not exerted we have not changed the ecosystem in a way that that will be conducive for behavioral change at the societal level. I am more worried, Mark, that this can be used by the climate deniers, or this can be used by the huge vested interest, the big lobbyists that gain with the current energy consumption and energy path, and that are happy with us not changing an inch. Because then it will be, and there has been, this is not a new debate, it has taken for so many years. The ones that are so technologically hype, in the sense that we should not worry, and those that are in the gloom to say that it doesn't matter. So I feel that what you and I are doing, what the initiative and Carnegie did, but also Pascal Lamy and what the Commons is doing, is to put this discussion in the right perspective. Because we are not going to say, ban any research on it. No, on the contrary, continue. And if there is merit, let's just put it at the table. But let's put it with very clear, substantive debate and research to see the merits of it. But let's do it also in the context in which we cannot stop the emission mitigation agenda that we agreed in 2015. I mean, it's just very far away. And therefore, the solution is a combination of all of this in my perspective, but we need to have clarity on the uses that can be made of these possibilities to just relax on the one hand for people that are not very conscious about it, or to be manipulated by these best editors that have been so good to ensure that we don't move away from consuming fossil fuels in the manner that we have been doing for so long.
So looking at solar radiation modification in particular, which is a particularly contentious topic, which has divided opinion in the scientific community, including over further research, I just heard a passionate support essentially for research. Perhaps you could explain a little bit more why you feel that that research is important, and going a little bit further, where should that research happen? How should that research happen? And how could it be done in a way that's inclusive of societies around the world?
Well, I think there is a very high degree of uncertainty. And it's important that we also recognize that even though the technological developments might tell us that it is feasible to do such kind of interventions, there are lots of uncertainties, as I said, in terms of modulating the kind of interventions that we do to make sure that we achieve the reduction of solar radiation and don't bring us to the other extreme. And therefore, who can give us assurances that this is the case? Well, no. So even for the technological part, we need to pursue more research, but we also need to have more knowledge of what is the take by our societies. And societies are different, and societies pursue different goals, and societies are from the countries all around the world. They stand in very different stages of development, of understanding, and therefore it's very important that we produce more research that help us to raise awareness on these issues. Because we are now at a stage that when you see the report that the COMES have done, and the report that the Climate Overshoot Committee did, it's still for the connoisseurs. It's still for those that can have certain level of understanding of the issues. So I feel we have the responsibility also to make it known and accessible. And it's for us to translate that knowledge into something that is accessible for the general public and also for the global south. But also,
so have you, sorry. Yeah.
It's true, my final point, that this doesn't come in an empty space. It comes in a space where there is a lot of confusion. There's a lot of, as I said, climate deniers. There's a lot of pseudoscience that is being produced to say, don't worry, everything will work out. And therefore, there is also a context when the trust in science, particularly on climate research, is not so high. And therefore, we also need to fix that, because we need to have this trust element that will help us advance meaningful debates around the world.
And that is clearly the very challenging context against which we're all working at the moment. Do you have any specific ideas, recommendations, thoughts on how we might actually go about sharing information about SRM, solar radiation modification, more widely? What might that dissemination of information look like? And maybe touching on that issue of, and how do you do so in a way that creates trust?
Well, I feel that this is an area where our mandate on the science at UNESCO has led to some lessons learned, because it needs to be a process that engages all the voices around the table. We cannot, as I said, become a place that brings only those that can speak our language. We need to really translate it into something that is inclusive. We need to reach out to marginalized groups. We need to reach out to vulnerable groups, the ones that are suffering more from climate change, even if they are not experts. So I think that one of the conclusions of the report is that UNESCO needs to again use its convening power to bring these actors around the table for a meaningful exchange, not a top-down, not the one that I know and those that don't know, but something that really brings everybody around the table. And we will be organizing those discussions. But then there is also the question of the framework in which science is developed. And this is the usual hard nut to crack, because at the end, these technologies are patent technologies that belong to certain institutions and researchers, private sector, public sector, but they belong to a patent protected knowledge base. And therefore, there needs to be some way to balance that protection of innovation with the need for the rest of the public to know. And I will tell you that this also requires this very important compass, ethical compass, because in the artificial intelligence field, where we developed this ethical recommendation on artificial intelligence, it was clear that we need to tap on the different areas that can bring knowledge to this, and we need to have a global conversation.
I think the ethical aspect of this is particularly fascinating. To have a society-wide discussion around SRM, whether to adopt it or reject it, especially in conditions of uncertainty, will require people to measure that discussion against their ethical frameworks. And as you said, all societies are different. You may see different societies applying very different types of ethical frameworks to these discussions and taking these decisions. What kind of approaches do you take to deal and tackle with these different ethical frameworks? Sometimes you may be having a conversation between two people and you think you're talking about the science, but you realize you're talking about the ethics and different approaches to that. Religion comes into it, different philosophies come into it. What kind of ethical frameworks do you think might be applied to a discussion around SRM?
Well, it's very interesting because it's true that the ethical notions might differ depending on where you stand. And these sometimes bring you to the relativism, cultural relativism. But there is something that is at the bottom line of the work we do and the definitions that we have at UNESCO on the ethical framing. And the ethical framing here is related to the promotion and protection of human rights and human dignity, the promotion of inclusive societies, the promotion of fairness, fair outcomes, social justice, the protection of the most vulnerable. So the ethical reflection might be different, but the outcomes in terms of protecting human agency, in terms of ensuring that decisions are taken with full knowledge of all the participants, I think are universal. And therefore, for me, it's not very complicated. The question, the ethical question, then defined in that way, bring us together. Because in all the world, you want to have dignity in your life, you want to have agency, you want to be the master of your decisions, and you want to have an inclusive and livable communities. The ethical issue might come also with the societal preferences. You have countries that are more risk averse. You have countries that are more risk takers. And therefore, this also should be put in the ethical reflections. And I see it now also, I bring the parallel with artificial intelligence, because there are countries like the US that are really open to risk. They have this tolerance to failure that is admirable. But then you have the European countries that are no risk takers, and therefore they will not trade off any kind of impact on human rights if it's related to any technological discussion. But at the end, what you find there is that you are not imposing your views. What you need to have is all the views at the table. The most risk taker, the less risk takers, the more innovative, the less innovative. Those that are never at the table, because this research, as I said, is being done by institutions in the global north. And then you have magic happening because they get agreements on things that you would never imagine. And again, the recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence or the work that we're doing in neurotechnology that applies the very same framework brings you with solutions. And that's what we need, but solutions that are not imposed by you or me or the institution or the global north, but solutions that are really shaped in an inclusive manner with very different views. And then it's very important, this is super important, that we don't leave this, the climate debate is so important that cannot be in the hands of the technicians. It has to bring the anthropologues, it has to bring the sociologues, it has to bring the historians, it has to bring the humanists, the arts, because humans are not just consumers or producers of technologies. We are creatures that are multidimensional and that have a soul and that have a brain and that have emotions. And therefore, I think it's very important that we bring this interdisciplinary approach that is also enriching the way we touch upon on these issues. It's not only for the experts, these conversations.
That's so interesting. I feel I'd like to have another whole conversation just talking about the role of arts and humanities in these discussions.
Let me tell you, Mark,
yeah.
we have a coalition that we call Bridges, because it's using humanities to understand climate transitions.
Fantastic.
And then you learn from indigenous knowledge, you learn from how some cultures think about rivers, or I mean, it's just fascinating, or how you use arts to change minds and to look at the planet in a different manner.
Maybe one final question on this. You alluded to UNESCO would be doing more work on this. Is there anything more specific you might say at this stage about next steps, and also how the work that you do in UNESCO might help inform other governance discussions in other parts of the international system?
What is very interesting is that I forgot to mention that we have a declaration on the ethical principles for climate change, which is exactly what we have been talking about. And the work on the climate engineering is a derivative of this declaration, which again puts fairness, inclusion, human rights at the center. And I think this is what we need to do. The report is going to be ready by the end of November. The committee is going to approve it there. We will have a session on climate engineering at the COP28. And so we are again advancing. And we had one last in Sharm el-Sheikh. And we started with conversation with the European Climate Foundation, with the Overshoot Committee, with Janos Pastor. So it was good. I think that we should continue with that. But then the report is also going to include very, very concrete recommendations on UNESCO. I'm not sure they're going to ask us to go for a normative instrument. That is one of the options. But in this case, is less obvious. But what I'm very sure is that they are going to ask us again to use this convener power and the fact that we are the most universal institution now that the US came back to UNESCO, and we're celebrating that, to bring the people around the table in a very honest way, and giving the voice to everybody so that we can have a considerate discussion, a considerate assessment, and that we can continue this debate that we are having now in an open, transparent, and inclusive manner. And actually in a multi-stakeholder fashion too, because you also need the private sector, you need the civil society, academics, and but I think it's going to be fascinating, and I think that this conversation that you and I are having is just the beginning.
Absolutely.
Of many more.
I look forward to more. Maybe I'll just finish on a slightly personal note. You come across as a very positive person, but of course we're dealing with very difficult, often intractable issues, serious consequences, and it can be difficult to maintain that sense of positivity, especially as you see previous progress being rolled back on and so forth. How do you stay positive? What philosophies, what approaches do you turn to keep that smile?
Well, first of all, I'm glad that I'm optimistic, and I thank mom and dad for having made me like this. But you are right. You are right in the sense that it only takes you to take a look of where we are in the world to feel a little bit dépassé, as we say in French. The fact is that, again, coming from an institution that is promoting science, I believe in evidence. sooner or later, leaders need to take evidence. And I have seen the power of facts. I was 20 years at the OECD using facts for convincing decision makers to take into account the scientific research to advance solutions. I'm sure you will say yes, but we are now with a lot of populist governments that don't look at facts. Yes, I know. But I have seen the magic when you put in the table. You remember it was this report that Lord Stern did on the cost of climate in the economic field, and it was path-breaking. And then it led to Mark Carney to say stranded assets. And that very same comment from a central banker to say stranded assets just created space for the financial sector to really be careful of not being investing in carbon-related instruments. I feel that we will be able to put this research, this evidence, so that we move forward. And that's why I appreciate so much talking to you, because the more noise we make, the more we bring the science, the more we bring the facts, the more we will be stronger in putting pressure to all those political economy issues that we need to deal with. But I'm positive. I'm positive. I know there are more beautiful people in the world than those that want to harm.
Well, on that positive note, I wanted to thank you very much, Gabriela Ramos, for taking part in such an interesting C2G talk.
Thanks to you. It was my pleasure, and we'll be continue talking.